Good morning. Welcome to the Level Set. I am Larry Fields, and I am joined this morning by the Mike Jones and the Dr. Charles Alexander. And we are going to delve into the most recent election results in the city of St. Louis and some of the background that led us to this space. So, without further ado, I am going to open this conversation up to Mike Jones and Dr. Charles Alexander, and I'm just going to ask a simple question. What happened?
Oh wow! It depends on how you want to look at it. Okay, the older I get, the longer the arc of my perspective becomes, and you could look at the election as the game, or you could look at it as the last game of the season, and that's what happened to the season. Because for me, uh, what you saw Tuesday is, I think, the last act in a black political arc for the last 30 years. And I've sent you guys some notes because when we talked about this for a minute yesterday, it made me start to think about it, not just the election, but the last 30 years and why black turnout is so low. Because I think if you look at the election, uh, you could say that white folks made other choices, but they are always subject to make other choices. The question is, what happened to black turnout? And
And let me add
I will,
perspective. Let me add
yeah,
perspective for those of you all that don't know. The in the city of St. Louis, the black female mayor lost. The longtime city of St. Louis black female comptroller lost. And for years we had a black mayor. For the last 4 years, black comptroller, and at one point, black chairman of the board of aldermen. And Mike Jones and Dr. Alexander will explain why that's so important. But Mike, I just wanted to add that context to what you're saying.
thanks, Larry, because that clarification is helpful. Uh, Matter of fact, it's essential. If you take from 1993, April of 1993, when the first black mayor got elected, to this Tuesday, April of 2025, that there are there's 32 years when the last black mayor lost the election. Spans 32 years. In that 32 years, I will say that black politicians, if they didn't literally run the city of St. Louis, they effectively ran the city of St. Louis, starting with your reference to those three offices or the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, which is the city's chief fiscal body. They do the budget, they spend the money. St. Louis has a weak mayor system, so that's where this body comes from. Over the last 30, over these last 32 years, for 24 of those 32 years, black politicians have made up two of those three members. I'm going to say that again. 24 of the 32 years, black politicians have made up two-thirds of that body. For 12 of those years, 32 years, the mayor has been black. But 30 of those, matter of fact, for 32 of those 32 those years, all 32, the comptroller was black, who was the city's chief fiscal officer. For 15 of those years, the comptroller and the president of the board of aldermen made up to two-thirds. For 12 of those years, the comptroller and the mayor made up to two-thirds. For for one of those 32 years, all three of them were black. So that is the effective administrative control of the city of St. Louis. Literally, nothing can happen in the city of St. Louis without the majority of E&A signing off on it, period, in the sentence. Since from 1993 to today, 2025, 40% of the Board of Aldermen has been black. For 28 years or so, we had 28 aldermen, 11 of them were black. For people who don't want to do the arithmetic, that's 39%. The Board of Aldermen was reduced in size to 15, and 6 of the 15 were black. That equates to 39, 40% of the legislative body. So put it like this. When the Board of Aldermen was 28 people, 15 votes were the majority. I would suggest, as a practicing politician, if you can start at 11 and can't count to 15, you got the problem. When the board was reduced to 15, 8 becomes the majority. If you start with 6 and you can't get to 8, you got a problem. So one of the things that we have to come to grips with is 3 decades of underperforming black political leadership. Now, the reason I can say that, because I participated in 4 of those years. Okay, so I'm putting me in that category too. And and I've said this out loud, written it, and said it publicly a whole lot of times. I consider my political career a failure, and I consider my political career a failure because we didn't win no championships. Okay, and when somebody has told me how can you say that given what you personally accomplished, Charles, you're in Chicago, and I remind them that Billy Williams and Ernie Banks are in the Hall of Fame, and the Cubs never got above 6th or 7th place. Now, so ultimately, Billy Williams and Ernie Banks, as great as they were, can't be put in the same class as Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, okay? Because they got some pennants, okay? They got 2 World Series. And the object is not your stats. The object is to win the game. And when you don't win, you have to accept responsibility for that as a player. I think that's the same thing in politics and political leadership. I can't talk how you can tell losing teams versus winning teams when you go into the locker room after the game. On a winning team, can't nobody tell you their stats. All they know is the score. They won. On losing teams, everybody can tell you what their stats are. Because they're not playing to win as a team. They just try to fill up the stat sheet of their own. And I would suggest that that's the arc of the last 30 years. And now you're still 40% of the Board of Aldermen, but you are now have no citywide elected officials that are in the role of administering and executing city government. You have some minor county officials who are elected citywide, but they have ministerial kind of duties. They don't make policy, and they don't execute government services, etc. So I think depending on how you want to talk about the election, the question is what how did we get here and how did we underperform so terribly over the last 30 years, or just what happened to this election on Tuesday? Two different stories depending on which one you want to talk about.
The um, there are a number of issues that are at play, and you talked about the voter apathy. And if we look at the arc of 30 years, there surely have been some changes for the benefit of the community.
The
Yeah,
Cubs didn't go. The Cubs didn't lose every game. Okay.
right. The Cubs did not lose every game, but the wholesale changes that I think the community expected with black leadership didn't occur. And I mean, so the question is, what do we do now?
I think if we were the general managers of this team, you'd say we starting from scratch, man. Don't tell me about yesterday and who did what. That where we are right now definitely requires a new strategy and may require different players. I don't know, but we fundamentally, with the exception of the Board of Aldermen, which can still be a major player, but understand the legislative body does not lead. It reacts to what the executive branch is doing, and the execution of public policy all happens on the executive side. Contrary to Trump and them crazy ass and the MAGAs and the Freedom Caucus and all that bullshit, you cannot run a government from a legislative body. You can only run a government from an executive function. The reason you can do it with a parliamentary system is because the executive sits in the legislative body, but the prime minister is different, and the ministers are different than the other members of parliament.
Dr. Alexander,
Yes, sir.
open the floor up to you at this point.
I think we and I think we have a like a coming together of a lot of different factors. I think that on the immediate end of it, I think we have to be mindful of the changing demographics in the city of St. Louis, as well as any other metropolitan area, and how that impact. Well, so the things that set up for the changing demographics, and then the process of it, and then the inputs as it's happening. And so you mentioned apathy. So apathy, we have people who, if you have a sizable population of folks who are feeling just fundamentally disempowered, right, then they're not going to turn out. When you have, if you have folks who aren't necessarily, well, not even aren't necessarily, you have folks that have limited political understanding, and when I say, and really, I just mean civics. Yeah, that have limited understanding about how a municipality or a city is supposed to run, you're going to have apathy, you're going to have indifference at best, right? So you're going to be mired in those situations one way or the other. And then we have people who, are great people otherwise, but they just grinding, and that the business of of the moment, of the hour, of the day, the week, the month, the year is literally to be able to build and maintain your household for some some large number of that population. Is not necessarily apathy. It is it's the civics piece isn't the focus of their day to day. Now, that too might be a function of their understanding of the civics piece, right? And so it's like, it don't matter who's in. I got to get this money, right? I got to do this because it's all the same. Blah 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 blah. And and so many people, kind of regardless of what their standard of life is, don't take the time to kind of to do the deep dive and look at some of the intricacies and the differences that occur when you pay attention to this politician versus this politician, this particular job versus this particular job, and kind of find where there's value added. And we have a disproportionate number of folks who fit some of those categories that I spoke of, and so it's not let's say it shouldn't be necessarily surprising when we see the low voter turnout, because I think the other thing that comes in that circumstance that I just said is that, or in that collection of circumstances that I just laid out, is that X number of people have been experiencing whatever it is they're experiencing for so long. They don't necessarily understand the election turnouts as an existential threat, right? So,
That's an excellent point. But let me ask you this, related to both of you all's comments. Mike Jones, what would a championship look like in your political career?
A championship would have looked like recognizing the shifting demographics and evolution of how the city was. The city of 2000 wasn't the city of 1950. And then addressing those issues, whether it's affordable housing, in ways that are relevant and effective for maintaining a quality of life. I'm glad Charles raised the point that he raised, because I never disagree with him, but I disagree with the point. We keep blaming the people. This is a leadership issue, okay? And I'm gonna stay with my sports metaphor. When your team ain't ready to play, that's a coaching issue. If they don't execute well, that's on your players. But when your players ain't got a plan and they ain't ready for the game, that's on you as the coach. So it's political leadership responsibility to energize an electorate and make them understand what they have to do to win this game. You ain't Coaches get fired every day because they can't do that. You can't. You can't. Mike Malone just got fired after winning the NBA title 2 years ago. You can't go in the room and say, "Well, I was a hell of a coach, but the players just didn't want to play, and they ain't showing up for practice or whatever the things that happen on bad teams." Your job is to fix that shit, and you signed up for the job. Didn't nobody draft you? They didn't kidnap you out your house. Your ass put. You said you stepped. You was Isaiah. We said, "Who shall we see, and who will go for us?" And your ass says, "Send me." And this is the shit we get. What you got to learn is to keep replacing folks till you find somebody that can do it. For when I hear black political leaders, now I ain't talking about black people now. I'm talking about people who want to be Isaiah. Send me. Say, "Well, you know white folks are racist." That's like you telling me water is wet. And now you surprised, just like you jumped into the swimming pool with all your clothes, and now you surprised because you're wet. That's part of it. That's part of the job. You don't get chance them excuses. And when you the leaders, you don't get excuses. And the reason there's no energy for you is for, if you look at the results for the mass of people, black people in St. Louis. I'm not going to even talk about all people in St. Louis. I'm just going to talk about black people now, because that's really what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. If you look at the results of the last 32 years, where we had effective control of the government, that means nothing in the city of St. Louis could happen. Nothing. Without the consent or the acquiescence of black political leaders. So I would suggest that the black community of St. Louis has made a judgment about buying a ticket for this political game. You know, there's some diehard Chicago Cubs fans, but the Cubs, back in those days, they didn't get 1 million, 2 million people a year like the Cardinals. Because the Cardinals or the Yankees or the Dodgers, they was winning. Okay? If you went to Busch Stadium on a weekend or a week or a 3-game series when the Dodgers or the Jazz was in town, the place was sold out. When the Cubs and the Mets came, you could get a ticket and sit any damn where you wanted, okay? Because nobody wanted to see them. That's fundamentally. Black folks turn out in Detroit. They've turned out in D.C. They've turned out in Atlanta. Let's take that Atlanta as an example. Atlanta has had a black mayor for the last 32 years, as far as I can remember. I can remember.
Longer.
Huh? Longer than that.
Probably
really.
Longer. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, I'm sure it's longer.
And black people go to Atlanta because they think it's a mecca of opportunity for black folks. Now, everybody that go down there don't get to be the president of Coca-Cola, okay? We ain't talking about that. Black people fail in Atlanta too. But they have an idea that they got a chance to win the game. They got a chance to make it happen. Ain't nobody coming to St. Louis. Ain't nobody black coming to St. Louis to say, you know what? I think if I go there, I got a chance to get a ring. So somebody's got to own that moment. We didn't accidentally get here. We didn't get kidnapped. This ain't the diaspora. We didn't end up in America lost. We inherited this, and this wasn't always the case. I can tell you, uh, I'll say almost a 50-year span where nobody white politically could do anything or try to do anything major without the cooperation, input, or support of black politicians. A couple in particular, Jordan Chambers and Bill Clay. It ain't a white politician calling after a black politician that they shit before they do it.
And so I'm not necessarily disagreeing with any of that. I'm saying that those factors exist. And now
I'm saying, Sean, that's what you got to fix before you start talking about
and that's
where
what
the
I'm
people got to go.
And that's exactly what I'm getting at. Is that I do think it is, the executive and the party's responsibility to educate the constituency about everything, right? How this thing works, why this thing does or does not work in your advantage, and how we do blah, 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 blah. Now, one of the points that you highlighted in terms of the, what would look like a win is kind of fundamental to this piece for us, and that is affordable housing.
Right.
And so, you mentioned Atlanta. I'm on board with this is it. Andre Dickens is the last one because two factors: A, the changing demographics of the city of Atlanta, and the lack of affordable housing. I'm thinking the same thing is a part of what we see in St. Louis, and that because kind of regardless of who's been in the seat in the city, I don't get a sense. Well, not even I don't get a sense. I know that people. So we've talked over and over and over again because you hammered home the point that the decline, that St. Louis's population decline didn't start yesterday.
Right.
That's been occurring since forever. Right. And so some of the data says started in 1910, and then some say it starts in 1950, but it definitely has been going on forever. And so, we have a city that's built for a population that's at least 3 times larger than what it currently is.
Right.
And even and with that population decline, affordable housing, because there in theory should have been more available housing, more available affordable housing. Those the price of housing continue to go up. And where it didn't go up, there were not amenities in those areas to, provide quality of life. And so, so where politicians and executive, city executives and municipal executives otherwise weren't able to meet those needs, you continue to have that thinning out, of the Black community. And then you figure that, X number of Black folks had as a goal, X number of Black folks who lived in the city had as a goal to leave the city because the suburban life was presumably better, right? So you had these things that have just been over time thinning out the population, the voter population. And so you have all of these kind of things coming together, and then you start to add in, the perpetual gentrification and, which puts more pressure on the housing stock and the changing demographics. And when you have cities that then start to build this, as I understand it, St. Louis is sitting on some type of financial war chest, white folks want folks who look like them to manage that money and develop that money. And we continue to be those, those same sparse factors, that collection of factors doesn't necessarily change for us. And so
But
we
Charles,
continue to be indifferent to it.
Charles, excuse me there.
Go ahead, go right
What
ahead.
I'm saying is there are macro forces that you can't do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
Historical trends, and I'm stipulating to those, and everybody is wrestling with them. But what I'm talking about is that when you're in charge, you have to be aware of stuff like that. You have to know where the limitations are, what you can do. So to me, this still comes back to the leadership. Put it like this. If we were in Alaska with a sled team, there are usually 7 dogs in the team if it's a big sled. But there's only 1 dog that sees the road. That's the lead dog. The other 6 are looking at each other's ass, okay? And they depend on the lead dog to keep them going because they can't see the curve. They got to follow where he's going. And even the driver of the sled depends on the lead dog. So what I'm talking about is a leadership responsibility. Now, I'm not even talking about success. I'm talking about being prepared to do battle with the forces that are undermining your well-being. Some days you'll win, some days you won't. If you look at Detroit, it collapsed. If you look at, you say Atlanta might be looking at its last black mayor, but they had hell of a runs. Okay, I mean there are hundreds of thousands, in Detroit's case, millions of black people that were able to elevate themselves because of competent, effective black political leadership. They didn't change shit about America. It's still racist. It's still all that. But inside of that context, they had effective black political leadership that made a difference in their lives. They didn't fix everything.
Mike Jones, if we could talk about that for a second. What should be the expectation of success for individuals that are the constituents of this leadership? You touched on it with respect to the mobility of individuals in Detroit. So, what should I would imagine that you can attack this in phases. The grassroots individual in St. Louis, the black business owner in St. Louis, the black professional. What should be those expectations of a competent black leadership?
That if I summed it all up, because each one of those segments, you say, got different priorities, different concerns. But what ought to come from effective black leadership is that each one of those segments think they now have a chance and an opportunity to compete and succeed. Okay? Period. Not no guarantee to everybody, because all I can give you as the coach is put you in a position to have a chance to win.
And I raised that question because so many of us, I raised the question because so many people keep talking about having their trash picked up on time, potholes in the street, but politics, Brian.
But Larry, I would suggest that's the given.
Exactly.
What's the given? That's the given for who?
For everybody, whatever the basic services are. Okay, whatever the basic services are. There's a level of competence that you got to demonstrate that all the shit that's supposed to happen happens. Then the real test of my leadership is what I can put on top of that. Okay.
So when you say that's the given, what does that mean?
Well, that means potholes got to get fixed.
Right. And
People
so,
got
right.
wait.
And so,
Yeah.
if I can go to Atlanta or Chicago or St. Louis, and the streets are different on the other side of Peachtree, or what would be my street in St. Louis? What,
Delmar, Delmar.
Delmar,
Delmar, yeah.
And I can go, the streets are different on the other side of
Jefferson Avenue. Okay.
yeah. Then and those streets are different, significantly different, whether I got a black mayor or a white mayor. I'm at a point I'm tuning out.
Absolutely. There's no
And
question about that.
yeah.
My point is this. My point is simple. We fail to oftentimes I think we fail to recognize that politics is essentially the division of resources.
right.
All resources. That's all it is at its purest form. But we act as if the bare minimum is all we can expect from it, and that shouldn't be the case, because those things that Mike mentioned initially, housing, and I'm going to add education, healthcare, and so forth and so on. Those are things that we should demand and that should be given. Job opportunities, so forth. Mike, the metaphor that you gave from the very first presentation I heard you give, hunting together, and once we are successful in the hunt, you dig in and fight for your respective aspect of it. Nobody's going to make your plate. We don't hunt. There doesn't even appear to be a hunt. There has not. I can't see where there's been a hunt to bring anything other than the I guess the NSA building, but there just it doesn't appear to be a hunt. I mean, but correct me if I'm wrong.
And so that before and that's kind of the space that I'm in, is that. And so the mayors come in, and most mayors, I would assume, are disproportionately focused on, private development of some sort. And even if it's housing, it ain't housing that benefits the masses. And so, which continues the downward pressure that already existed. And so the mayor could come in and have a portfolio that looks like he or she has been getting it done, but you still leave all of these people in the wake. And I do believe that part is a leadership issue. But what I'm speaking to is the people's response to those failures or misprioritizations.
So
Is that the people are going to have a response to that over time on one hand, and then I think on the other hand, again, to the degree that the people are not, like, you gotta look at it with like Maslow's hierarchy. So that person who is literally in the grind, the political piece, for better or worse, is not high on his or her register.
and Charles, the reason I focus on political leadership as opposed to the people is for the same reason I focused on the coach and not the players. Because I can't fire the players. I can fire the coach. And I'm looking for a coach who can make them better players. Okay, now that it really ain't no more complicated than that. Larry, to your point about the hunt, another thing I used to say that I haven't said in a long time, but I was thinking about it yesterday after we texted each other. There are two types of carnivorous animals. They are predators and they are vultures. Both are meat eaters. The difference between predators and vultures is predators hunt and kill what they eat. And they eat first and their kids eat.
Yeah.
vultures have to wait on somebody to kill something, and they clean up what's left.
Right.
Now everybody's a meat eater. And matter of fact, they both serve a role in nature. Okay, I mean,
In the circle of life.
it's the circle of life. But you have to decide, or you go, a wolf or a sheep. But you have to decide if you're a meat eater. Do you want to be a predator or do you want to be a vulture? Because one of them hunts and the other one has to wait. So and I'm suggesting once you say I want to lead, then by definition you got to become a predator at that point.
So
okay.
So different question. So which first black mayor? So it's a two-part question. Which first black mayor ascended to the seat in an ever-expanding city? So that's question one. And question two, after that black mayor was able to do that, how many black mayors ascendancies reflected that? They obtained that seat in a city, within a city whose economy was expanding and ever expanding at the time of that election.
Off the top of my head, the only one, and I will stipulate about the structural issues that you talk about, the economy and stuff. So I would say Atlanta comes to mind.
He's probably exactly the only one.
Right. And maybe Detroit with Dennis Archer's first term after Coleman Young, because you got to remember Coleman was the mayor for 20 years, so he used up a lot of that upside. He helped create it, and he used it up a lot. So everything kind of has a run. It's got a cycle. So the real question is a more realistic question would be, how much upward movement did you get during the time that you won the team? So the question, since you only get one champion in any sport a year, the criteria can't be the championship, not really. But the real question is your team getting better every year? And do you believe at some point you got a chance? Now, part of the problem with a place like St. Louis that we refuse to ever deal with, white folks didn't want to deal with it, and we parroted their stuff, because you'll hear black folks say the same thing, that St. Louis could be a great city. I've been all over the world. There are no great cities of 300,000 people. 300,000 people is a neighborhood in Paris or Chicago. Okay.
It's the south suburbs. It's the south suburbs of Chicago.
Yeah. So the reality is, you ain't gonna be Division I. You ain't gonna be in the ACC or the SEC or the Big 12. You Division II, maybe even Division III.
We gotta be Wake Forest if we're in the ACC.
Yeah, but you gotta understand that, and you say by the division we're playing in, or based on the competition in the league that we're in, are we maxing out on what's possible for us? And that's what I'm talking about. I don't have an absolute thing that you can say, here's where you want to get. What you got to do is what you do with everything. I need to get better every day, okay? And maybe I ain't getting better fast enough, and I can guarantee you somebody come in last every year. But that don't mean they didn't get better every year.
So the reason why I bring that up is, again, I think So I think I know that our standards of measure are skewed across the board, not necessarily St. Louis, or not solely St. Louis, but across the board. So this brother Watts, he wrote this article. He wrote an article. He's a professor somewhere in New York City. He's a brother. I talked to him before also about this article. I talked to him about this article when Barack was running for his first term. So I guess this guy wrote this article in '02 or something like that, because we were having a conversation about it for the '04 run. And the title of the article is "Of What Use Are Black Mayors?" And one of the things is that we got Black mayors. So like, so when you give us the history of Black leadership in St. Louis, you know, that was about, by and large, the local leadership in these particular places around the city who coalesced to take care of Black folks, right? And then, and so that power base existed, you know, regardless of what was going on in the mayoral seat, right? And so once we start to have the dynamic changes that came with both the civil rights movement and white flight, and as a part, or, you know, I don't know if it precedes or as a part of the white flight, kind of the deindustrialization of the metropolitan areas, and a sizable number of work either going to the suburbs or being outsourced overseas. What you had is Black mayors ascending to dying cities.
Agreed.
And I think sometimes when we look at how that happened, we weigh a little too heavily on the individual that ascended, as opposed to his or her ascendancy in the context of the larger thing, right? The reason that we were able to ascend in some of those places was because of the vacuum that white folks in business left.
But Charles, where you and I are on different tracks, I agree with everything you just said. Those are the macro forces, the structural issues that you don't control, that you inherit. I'm not talking about the masses. I'm not talking about the people in the stands. That's who the voters are. That's who the community. They buy a ticket, have a couple of beers. They watching the damn game. Okay. Some of them know what they're looking at, most don't. I'm critiquing the goddamn players and the coach.
I get that.
And so everything you just said, I don't expect the public to know that.
But I think they gotta know. That's my and I do think that that's one of the failures of the league. They have to know.
But that's a leadership failure, because leadership got to know that, and then they got to be okay. And so if you want to put you got to put it somewhere. I was going to say this earlier. We got to make a distinction between fault and responsibility, blame or responsibility. I'm not trying to blame anybody, because that gets people the defensive and the accusatory. But you do have to hold people responsible. If we were in the military and the base was a mess, and we were from the Inspector General's office, when we walked in the base and saw the chaos, we wouldn't say we need a meeting with pull the troops together so we can have a meeting, you know what we would say? Where is your commanding officer? Period.
And I'm not refuting that. I'm saying that we get the same thing if we don't. So, so if we go to your Denver metaphor, why we keep giving Russ Book the ball in the last 5 minutes of the game?
Right.
So and so if you're around,
y'all gonna get off the Brody. Now we're not gonna jump on the Brody this morning. Brody is not perfect, but the Brody is
he got a lot of heart though.
He got a lot of heart. He played hard and all of that, but you can't give Russ the ball at that time of the game.
Wait a minute. You know what? At Westbrook is a great analogy for black political leadership. Okay. I can give him credit for hard play. I give him credit for all of that. But why the hell did you give him the ball at the end of the game?
Why did you give him the ball?
Russ ain't supposed to have the ball or taking the shot. Okay.
Oh,
yes. And so, so look, I think that piece, it just he's silly there. This thing is just such it's a heavy lift all the time, and it's those moving parts that they don't really change for us, and they're like, so for me, I've had like a magnificent run, right? So I lived my life is spent between three what I think are dynamite spaces that I enjoy very much. I enjoy St. Louis, Chicago, and Atlanta in that order. That those are my favorite places. I work and live in Chicago because I could do it a little better than I could do it in St. Louis. But if the market yielded in St. Louis what it yielded for me in Chicago, I would be in St. Louis. But so I've had an opportunity to kind of, when I came here in '92, you would have felt like Mayor Washington died yesterday. Like them jokers were still grieving, and we was under the thumb of the Daley administration, and but you could see and hear kind of visible Black city council representation fighting for those whatever their constituency was, and it was we gonna fight what we gonna fight, and blah 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 blah, and that's what they were doing, and and they were doing what was necessary to move resources as they need to move resources into their cities, and they were fighting with their state reps and coalescing with their state reps and with their U.S. Reps, and so you could see that now under this current mayor, and even under Lightfoot before, like we don't have that same kind of groundwork in the communities that existed before, like that infrastructure that made it possible for Harold Washington to ascend, and then made it possible to kind of continue to fight in those years after him, and that no longer exists. In Atlanta, whatever that group was, whoever they were, I know on the front end of it, I know who those people were. Those people, they by and large were, a bunch of folks who looked like Daddy King and Maynard's grandfather, who made it possible for that. And then you had some kind of some deals cut in order to kind of keep the peace in the city. But as you start to lose, those other folks, and in St. Louis, it's the folks that you teach us about, Mike. As you lose that class and you don't replace that class, you almost suck when you get to the point of having a Black mayor.
Now, Charles, I agree. Here's where I think we can put this back together. I will be the first to stipulate that this is a complex problem with no simple answers. And generally speaking, Americans of all ethnicities are some simple-minded people. Okay? So the nuances that you're talking about, the mitigating circumstances that come into play in all of these things are real, and they are mitigating factors in anybody's effectiveness in any environment that they're in. You have to be. What I'm saying is at a leadership level, though, you have to have a heightened awareness of all these mitigating factors, because they go influence your strategy, how you choose to play the game, what you can think you can get done. It's just like a coach looking at the field. Figuring out the strategy based on these players and who I got to play against, who they got to play against. What's the best, most effective thing I can get done with them this week or tonight? Okay, that's all the coach's job is. My simple answer to this complex situation is the people we pick to lead, to represent us in a leadership capacity, have to be better. Okay? Now, okay? Just no more complicated than that. This shit is hard. It's complicated. Some of it is endemic to the culture, the structure, the system. I would say the American governance structure is obsolete, it's archaic, it's from the end of the 18th century, designed for looking back at European history and what Jefferson and them they were trying to compensate for kings. And nobody would have imagined that in a country this big with 50 million people, you would still be using the same governance structure that you used in 1789. And there's no other country on the planet that does that, by the way. So that lets you know how unintelligent Americans are, because they still talk about what the founding fathers envisioned, and the founding fathers didn't have electricity, running water, indoor plumbing. The diesel engine hadn't been invented yet. There wasn't no trains, wasn't no cars. So that's crazy to reference that for this. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of ways, we're stuck also with dumbass white folks in this system, and we glorify the system too. So I think one of the responsibilities of Black leadership is to say this shit don't work. Okay, it ain't never worked for us. But if you really want to know true white folks, it don't work.
And I think there's a challenge. Well, I know that there's a challenge for Black leaders at whatever level to be able to finesse that, because I don't know. I mean, St. Louis ain't considered a major city no more, but because in terms of its demographic side, but it's one of the few cities. I would imagine that it's one of the few. I have to go back and look. Or Mike, you probably noticed. I mean, the number of Black folks and white folks is not significantly different. The number is not significantly different. But even with that, I think wherever you go, we don't understand that for us to win. And when I say win, I mean in order for us to have somebody who's at least going, on a typical day, consider something that's in our better interest. And if they are not on a typical day, we're willing to, at least we could talk to them about it.
And I'll take that. To me, that's the standard. Okay.
Yeah, that we don't understand that requires us to coalesce with other groups. And so we start to believe that if the politician, if the leader, if the party has to talk to somebody other than us, that is necessarily at our expense. And as opposed to trying to figure out, what is it that would make that group that's not my friend otherwise my friend, in this particular issue. And we struggle with that. And so I think that's
Charles,
both a people and
Charles,
leadership issue.
Somebody has to do that.
Right. I think it's a both issue. I think it's a people and the leadership. And let's have a philosophical argument here, just for a minute. I cannot think of a serious political philosopher in the Western canon that advocates for direct democracy. They will advocate for democratic values, but the flaw in democracy is it requires more from people to govern themselves than most people are willing to do or even able to do per what the circumstances that you've been alluding to. So Plato wrestles with this in the Republic. Okay, that how do you balance? And so it comes down to issues like character and intelligence, on whose shoulders the leadership falls. Now, all social animals who live in a herd or a pack, they're all hierarchical. But you don't get to be the leader of the pack or the herd or the tribe unless you can operate in the interests of the pack, the herd, and the tribe. Because just don't anybody get to lead. You got to be worthy of being in the first order. And them dogs I was referring to on the sled, all of them start out as puppies, but everybody don't get to be the lead dog. The sled drivers will look at a puppy. What your country boys say, that dog won't hunt, and so they find the puppies that can be big dogs, and that's what I would say in ancient times, like when I was growing up, our forefathers used to do, forefathers and foremothers, and they would look at a child and they say, "Oh, that boy's gonna be something one day," or "That girl, she got something going." And they would even try, if they thought that about you, they would try to steer you in a way so that when you got to that place, you were bringing this stuff with you, that it had become, but they wasn't trying to think the whole schoolyard was going to the leadership podium. But they say, in this schoolyard, we got some. And part of the job of the old folks is to figure out who are the one. Now, all of them ain't gonna make it, but what group? Because some of them we could lose along the way. Some of them ain't what we thought. But we got to start with a cohort that we can nurture and develop, so that they get to be
who we want, who we want them to be. So it's complicated, and one of the things that we don't have anymore, we don't have difficult, complicated discussions anymore. We some simple-minded folks on social media, where everybody who ain't got nothing to say can take up a whole lot of space saying it.
And it's like, so
Larry, you're unmuted.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Last statement, Dr. Alexander?
are we wrapping up?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, and so I think we'll as long as we have Black leadership, I think we'll be in this conversation. I think it's a good thing that we continue to have this conversation because it reflects that there is a level of Black leadership. I just hope that when we're having this conversation, there are some Black leaders that we can at least reliably count on because they're not all in the pockets of AIPAC. And so, which we see can impact us from the highest to the lowest of Black leadership. But I do think we always have to be kind of looking at what frameworks that we use to choose and to measure and evaluate what our leadership is. And one of those things is, I think we have to kind of figure out how we strike that balance between the leadership and the followership. And in that, we may be better able to get what we want. But in the main, I think also one of our failures is that this is a space in which I think we look back to our past in ways that aren't really fruitful for us.
I agree.
Absolutely. Well, let me thank you both for a fascinating morning. I think that we did an outstanding job of hashing out the issues here, and we have a great program going forward. And I would like to take this time to tell two people, Mike Jones, your political career is not a failure. And wherever you are, Russell Westbrook, those strays that you received today. I apologize for, but no, I want to thank you all for that, and we look forward to actually navigating in this space and seeing how we can advance our issues and interests during this time frame. And let's not lose sight of the fact that as we look at the arc of history, this is still one of the better times in this place to be Black because
Right.
we don't want to go back. So, where we are, we've got to fight and keep moving forward and planting trees that we know we will not enjoy the shade of. So, on behalf of the Level Set, the Mike Jones, Dr. Charles Alexander, I'm Larry Fields. We thank you all for tuning in, and God willing, we'll see you next week.